Thank you. How the hell did I ever find time to do all these things? I've got no idea. Let me tell you today about somebody called Joy Worrell. It's a name that will not be familiar to many of you. Joy Worrell was an 81-year-old pensioner. She worked hard all her life, she paid her taxes, and she raised a family. When she received a modest inheritance from the DWP, because Joy was a very honest, hard-working lady, she did the right thing and she told the DWP about it. Rather than just freezing Joy's pension credits, they froze her state pension as well, leaving her with no income whatsoever. Every month, Joy would watch her savings get lower and lower until there was nothing left. Last year, she took her own life. She had £5 left in her bank account. The coroner heard that Joy was too proud to tell her family about her financial difficulties. Joy deserved much better from us than that. David Clapson, he was a diabetic ex-soldier who once faced death on a daily basis for his country. When he left the army, he went straight to work for BT, and then he became a full-time carer for his mother. After she went into a home, David turned to the state for help. But he had his £71.70 a week job seekers allowance axed simply because he missed an appointment with an advisor. Stripped of his income, David could not afford food. He couldn't pay his electricity. And he died starving and penniless and alone. David had just £3.44 to his name, 6 tea bags, a tin of soup, and an out-of-date can of sardines. His electricity card had run out, meaning that the fridge where he kept his insulin chilled, or should have kept his insulin chilled, was not working. A coroner found that he had no food in his stomach. A pile of CVs for job applications were found next to David's body. This is a paragraph from an article which appeared in The Guardian a few months ago. It was a sight Lorna Jackson, a London head teacher, had never expected to see. 2 pupils at her primary school sleeping behind bins at the station with their parents. Mum, Dad, and the 2 little children were all sleeping on a mattress they had found. The family had been evicted, and the children had very little to eat. It was Anaya Bevan who said, "No amount of cajolery and no attempt at ethical or social seduction can eradicate from my heart a deep, burning hatred of the Tory party. So far as I am concerned, they are lower than vermin." Those words have never been more apt than they are today. We stand against one of the most cruel and arrogant and self-serving governments this country has ever seen. It has sanctioned people with mental health problems. It stripped them of their benefits, leaving them with no money to buy food or pay for heating. It's repeatedly broken the law in order to deny the vulnerable and the disabled the help they so badly need. It spent millions of pounds of taxpayers' money trying to stop people getting the benefits they're entitled to. It's robbed thousands of their independence by taking away mobility cars, leaving them isolated and alone. Thousands of people, thousands have died after this government has certified them fit to work, filling their final days on this earth with anxiety and worry and heartache. This government is responsible for deaths It's responsible for starvation. It's responsible for untold suffering and despair on a scale we've not seen since the Victorian era. Is it any wonder Jacob Rees-Mogg looks so smug? Before resigning, Theresa May tweeted that the Conservative Party was the party of decent and patriotic politics. Decent and patriotic politics. Those decent and patriotic politics have led a UN committee to say that government cuts have caused a human catastrophe for disabled people. It's led the British Red Cross to say the NHS is facing a humanitarian crisis. Human Rights Watchdog has accused the government of actually breaching its international duty to keep its citizens free from hunger. The UN's rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights has reported the government's austerity policies have deliberately gutted local authorities and effectively eliminated many social services, reduced policing, closed libraries in record numbers, shrunk community and youth centres and sold off public spaces and buildings. Its report concluded it was hardly surprising civil society has reported unheard of levels of isolation, prompting the government to appoint a minister for the prevention of suicide. We now need a minister for the prevention of suicide in this country. In the world's fifth largest economy, the rapporteur found 1/5 of the population, that's 14 million people, living in poverty. 1.5 million destitute. That means they can't even afford basic essentials. Close to 40% of children are predicted to be living in poverty by 2021. That's 1 in 2. The report found a shocking rise in food banks, homelessness, rough sleeping. It described falling life expectancy, fuel poverty, the decimation of our legal aid system, millions of workers living in poverty, a welfare safety net that's been systematically eroded, and warns that unless austerity is ended, and ended now, the UK's poorest people face lives that are solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. For God's sake, what's happening in this country? The report condemned austerity programmes inflicted by successive Tory-led governments as an ideological project causing pain and misery, enforced by ministers in a state of denial about exacerbating inequality and poverty across the UK. We've seen a decade of wage stagnation, rising inequality, soaring child poverty, soaring in-work poverty, soaring homelessness, soaring malnutrition. We've even seen a reduction of our life expectancy and the return of Victorian diseases. I'm sick to death of hearing Tory ministers smugly saying every time you see them in the media that we have record low unemployment in this country. The record low unemployment they are talking about is the result of record high exploitation of workers. 0 hours contracts, short-term contracts, poverty wages. They've left millions of working families unable to pay their bills, unable to feed their kids. Every night, millions of working people go to bed and they put their heads on their pillows and they lie there in the dark, their stomachs knotted, worrying about how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to pay their rent. Work is something that should enable us to flourish and grow, not just survive. People wonder why I always look so bloody angry in my films. A record 60% of Britons in poverty are now in working families. The number of workers entering poverty is actually rising faster than employment. Real annual wages, £800 a year lower than in 2010. This is the reality of Tory Britain today. 1 in 200 sleeping on our streets or in temporary accommodation. 1 in 200. More than 1 million families on the waiting list for social housing. More than 1 million families. In 2017, we built 6,000 houses. More than 1 million families waiting for social housing, and we build 6,000 homes. We've got GPs prescribing nutritional drinks to starving patients to keep them alive. We've got 17 million people in this country right now today with less than £100 in savings. That should be on the front page of every national newspaper. That's 17 million people right now at this very moment, literally a heartbeat away from being thrown onto the streets with their families. Does this sound like an economy that works for everyone? For the sake of those now facing a never-ending nightmare of poverty, misery and despair, for the memory of the thousands who have lost their lives to this government's cruel austerity policies, we must rise up. And as dark as it may seem, I know in my heart that if we stand together and we fight together, we can defeat this insanity and justice will prevail. Thank you.